Hello, good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're watching this, and welcome to Painting with Stephen episode 20. So, back to the traditional umber staining of the canvas. I wanted to make this one a sort of moody loch. That was the idea. And I think it went reasonably well. I think I could have done some things a lot better, but then at the same time I was also working on a smaller canvas than maybe I should have been for a work like this. I don't know, but I'll talk you through what I'm doing and show you anyway even the stuff that I probably could have done better, because obviously that's the way everyone learns, including me and painters and whoever else. So but anyway, I'm doing the sky right now, and that's something that I do believe went reasonably well with this painting, is the sky, because I was bringing in some moody pinks, some very subdued pastel pinks, some yellows, some big moody clouds. I do think though with lighter skies you're probably better off varnishing afterwards. And I might varnish this painting up, when I'm very sure it's completely dry, because just almost to make the colours pop again. Because I feel like with skies like this, like it's nice to have those colours like pop a little bit more again, and yeah. But I mean, really, like, I think the key to three-dimensionality, I mean, we've talked about this on this channel many times before, one of the keys to three-dimensionality with anything is colour contrast. So with clouds, you really can just, the sky's the limit. Literally. No pun intended. Because you can just add in a whole host of colour, right? So for example, with those pink clouds, you can see that that's just pink with greys over it, right? To give it that three-dimensionality that you get in real life. When you have, let's say, you want a moodier cloud, so you've got your grey umber, because obviously pretty much every colour, I've brought this up on the channel before as well, pretty much every colour that I use is mixed with umber to tone it down. Raw umber, that is. Burnt umber doesn't work for that purpose as well. Burnt umber's too brown. Raw umber is almost like a desaturator, almost. You could think of it that way. I mean, obviously it is still a brown, but it's almost like an earthy mud brown, whereas burnt umber's more like what you would see, like the brown, a reddish brown, like a sort of tree bark brown. So for skies, for clouds, raw umber's your friend. You can really use that to desaturate blues, greys, all sorts. But yeah, so as you can see, you can add in all of these different variations of greys, and then you can layer lighter and darker colours on top to really make these cool three-dimensional effects. And I think it's and also, if you're using an umber layer like I am that's already dry, you can just let that shine through, especially if you're going to varnish it later, because it sort of makes a lot of that umber just pop underneath, and it gives you that moody ethereality that you want. So yeah, I'm quite happy with how the sky turned out. I like doing skies like this, with big thick clouds and nice sort of sunrise, sunset colours with pinks and yellows and stuff. You can see there's a very subdued yellow just just sort of in that dark grey cloud there, you know, like there's just a little hint of yellow as if there's some form of light underneath that big thick grey cloud. And then I'm adding in more sort of light forms here to give that three-dimensionality to the grey clouds on the left. By just adding a subdued white, obviously not, again, like this white will have been watered down with grey, maybe a bit of umber, just so that it's not so overpowering. And then obviously, you know, with the highlights on this more yellowish side, I'm using yellow, a little bit of white, a little bit of umber, some grey, and you know, it just all mixes in there and just gives you a really nice dirty highlight colour. Do not be afraid of dirt. When I say dirt, I mean dirty colour. Dirty colour is what you find in reality, right? You never find, unless you're intentionally going for an oversaturated look, which is obviously which I've done before and I love, especially with my oil painting. I will intentionally go for an oversaturated look for stylistic purposes, which I think can be very effective, really draw the viewer's eye. You know, a lot of people love it, you know, especially the problem is, right, I think one of the main drawbacks of painting, you know, for example, moody paintings or symbolic paintings, or, you know, paintings that, you know, are maybe, I would say maybe more genuinely artistic in the sense that there's underlying meaning behind them. The problem with painting works like that is that most people just want something pretty to hang on their wall, you know what I mean? You're not going to sell a lot of paintings that way, unfortunately. I wish things were different because, I mean, obviously, you know, we don't live in a society that really properly protects its arts and protects its artists and is putting stock into the genuine meaning and symbolic meaning of art and by extension life, you know, because for example the Greeks and the Romans, these societies cherish their art, they cherish their artists and put that up on a pedestal as this is what you should be aspiring to be, right? You know, like it was used as a way to explore important cultural motifs within their societies. Whereas art now, most people see it as simply superficially aesthetic. They don't give, they don't care about the underlying meaning of a piece or whatever. So from that perspective, right, going back to oversaturation and just catching the eye and pretty colour and all that sort of stuff, a lot of people prefer, I mean, this is where all this modern art crap comes in, and abstraction and all this rubbish. And I'm not saying that everything with abstraction is bad. Far from it. I like abstract paintings, you know, when used more in the impressionistic sense or the symbolic sense. You know, I mean, Turner played around with abstraction. You know, that's the level of abstraction that I like. But when you're talking about, you know, money laundering basically through cult-like, you know, fucking crap, painting rubbish on a canvas, like just, you know, like a red line down a white canvas with like splatters of green on it and stuff like this, that means nothing, doesn't mean anything. But some people literally just hang that up on their wall, firstly because of a name or because they think it's like makes them part of an in crowd, an in group. But secondly, the reason they'll put that up on the wall is just purely simply an aesthetic thing, like a colour thing. I mean, some people will, for example, go, well, I have purple walls, so I want a complementary painting, like a purple painting, to go up on my wall, and that it's as simple as that. That's what goes into the thought process. It's not. There's nothing deeper going on. They don't care about what's going on in terms of the art. So from that perspective, you can actually, and by the way, I'm not ranting about this in a negative way, although it might sound like that. And you know, I think I'm more trying to make the point, if you want to actually sell paintings, a lot of the time, you're better using oversaturation. Although it might not produce a better piece of art, it might produce a more sellable piece of art. Those two things are very different things. And you know, a lot of the time, reality isn't what people want to see. People want to just see something that pops. You know, they want to see, you know, just like a sort of thing that draws their eye and draws the viewer's eye in general. You know, when someone comes round for a cocktail party, they want to see something. Oh, look at that. That's interesting. You know what I mean? That's the thought process. Okay, so from that perspective, oversaturation can be a really great tool. You know, just go in literally a bit like, you know, the Impressionists when they first discovered pre-made, pre-mixed oil paint for the first time, and they literally just sort of went crazy with it and started, you know, painting these super bold, super saturated pieces of art that, you know, with almost sickeningly saturated colour. You know what I mean? Like almost so sweet that it was, you know, like eating like candy floss. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? It was so strong. And then all of a sudden, post-Impressionists started to sort of tone that down again, because they sort of went, yeah, okay, there's novelties maybe ran out a little bit. Do you know what I mean? But now with modern art, I think it's really gone back to that whole, you take the colour out the tube and you put it on a canvas. There's no toning it down. There's no mixing even, really. It's more just splash it on, you know? Whereas something like this, like, you know, with that sky, it's more every single colour you see that makes up that sky has been desaturated in some way, right? Like it's all been mixed. No colour on there has gone straight from the tube, right? This is a very important point, if you know, especially if you're a beginner artist watching this. If you know, it's a very important point if you want to produce more sort of subdued or pastel-like effects, or you want to produce more moody effects, these sort of things. See, from that perspective, you want things to be very, very toned down in colour. You really don't want to be going straight in there. For example, say you were trying to paint the pink in the sky, you definitely don't want to just get a pink paint from the tube, you know, that says like pink on it. I don't know what, permanent pink or whatever, and then put it straight on the canvas. That's not going to give you a good result. It's going to look sickeningly sweet. Again, it's going to look too much. And it's the same with greens. We've discussed that on this channel many times before. I think one of the sort of most intense conversations I've had about it was on my painting Haunted Highlands. If you go and check that out, I go really in depth of why you need to pre-mix your greens. Greens are probably the hardest thing to get right, I think, when it really comes to that especially when it comes to oversaturation, because you can be so sickly sweet with greens. They can get so oversaturated so quick. So it's very, very difficult to control. This is where, you know, you should probably be pre-mixing greens anyway, with using blue and yellow, or some variation of that, you know, like whether it's like even grain yellow or whatever you're using. But actually, with this painting, I didn't do that. What I did was, and you know, this is sort of an easier way to do it if you can't be bothered mixing all of these sort of colours. An easy way to get cool greens for a more subdued effect is to just take a green out the tube, right? Mix it with raw umber, mix it with, you know, a little touch of grey, you know, like Paynes Grey, to darken it, but also keep, you know, like you know, keep all of these sort of tones separate so that you have all of these at your disposal. Then add a little bit of white and yellow, like, you know, again to create like 5 or 4 different green variations. The yellow will obviously produce a more sort of I don't want to say lighter green, but it almost acts as a highlight colour. You can use it as a sort of highlight, you know, to certainly highlight light and sun and stuff like that, but also it can just produce a sort of nice effect, you know, like just a sort of nice variation of green that you can then use on darker greens, you know. And it doesn't have to be more complicated than that, you know what I mean? And then just again, because all of it's been sort of tampered with, watered down, you know, desaturated, it's going to look so much better than just using it straight at the tube. Here's a thing, by the way, I don't know if anyone's noticed, but one of my sort of go-to brushes for acrylic painting, it basically fell off the top, you know, with all the bristles just fell off. So I ended up, you know, sellotaping it back on. That wasn't ideal. But and a really annoying thing, like you can see there, like it's like all sellotaped on. Something that I do, I think I finally found a reason to hate acrylic. So I'm gonna quickly talk about that, because, you know, this channel, obviously a lot of the early stuff focused on oil painting, then I moved to acrylic because of how convenient it was and how easy it was to layer, and I fell in love with acrylic, and it's not changed. I absolutely adore acrylic. I'm going to be using it probably for, you know, like moving forward indefinitely, certainly in combination with oil still, but yeah, no, absolutely, I love you know, using acrylic. I just think it's so incredible from a layering perspective and stuff like that. But I have found a problem with it, and the problem is that it seems to make my brushes just go like really tacky. See, with like oil paints, you can use solvents to sort of like, you know, wash away all the oils from your brush, and then you can beat them on a beater and they come out pretty much as good as new. I'm not finding that with acrylic. Acrylic seems to be very much just sort of almost tacking up the brush and making it super hard, and it's not useful at all. Like it's really starting to affect some of my brushes now. Not that I care. I mean, I'll still use them. I mean, as long as they deliver paint to the canvas, I'm not really that bothered. But it is definitely something that has been quite annoying to me recently. So yeah, keep that in mind if you're using acrylics. I don't know what the solution is, if anyone has a solution. Should I use solvents on acrylics? I don't know, like maybe some, if there's any artists watching this right now, that have had experience with this and that, you know, can help out with that, they can let me know, because yeah, it's quite annoying, yeah, the way it affects your brush. But I've ruined that brush anyway, the one where the head fell off. You know, I'd ruined it beforehand because it was I smoosh it right into the canvas to get all these crazy effects, especially for clouds and stuff like that. I find that very useful. You should always have one brush where it's just like you've just completely ruined it almost, you know, so that you can use it for all these variety strokes. And I've done that so many times now that it really has just basically become a sort of brush that you go to almost abuse, you know. I'm in an abusive relationship with my brush. It's an abusive relationship with me. Right now I'm using a very, very thin detail brush to add sort of very subdued greens to these faraway hills here, just to make it look like there's an indication of highlights from the light, you know, that are giving more detail to the hills. So I think, again, that will come out nice when you varnish it as well. Like, I think, see the end photograph, it's not varnished. It was obviously just, I always take those right after I paint them. So my second day, this took 2 days to paint, or 2 sessions. So I painted it right after my second session. But I think this one will look better with varnish, because I think those greys that I use for the hills are gonna pop more. So I think it will be good. I'm excited to see, you know, with a bit of varnish, what it does to this painting. I think it will be cool. But I've painted the sort of almost far away hills, and then I'm gonna add sort of closer sort of hills that are, you know, sort of more on the loch bit, you know, like more right beside the water rather than very far away. I mean, they're all like surrounding the loch, but you know, obviously the one nearer is gonna have brighter colour, to push the ones behind further away. And you know, that's pretty much one of the things that you can utilise for perspective. You know, make your far away mountains and hills darker than the things, obviously, you know, closer to you, you know, in the forefront. It's a good, useful, effective tool in order to create depth. And you know, I think it's worked relatively okay here. I'm adding in sort of more like a brown, ochreish, or umberish, I should say, like rocks into this nearer one instead of grey. So I think that's pretty cool. You know, just to add little variations like that as well, you know, add variations into your rock colour and different things like that. And I also wanted, as well as lighter colour, with this I wanted also to introduce more like a sort of textured approach to the way that I'm doing like the grasses and stuff like that. Okay, so like I want more of a sort of textured, almost like a grass-like, foliage-like thing with this. And I think that's what I'm sort of trying to go for here. Like, I'm more using the brush, like, not in strokes, but I'm more using the brush, like, dabbing to produce a, like, textured effect, right? It's a bit like, you know, for example, see when you are doing foliage and you use the bristles of the brush to create tons and tons of variant strokes by sort of dabbing them into the canvas. You let that dry, and then you go in with your top colours, your highlight colours, to then produce what looks like sort of big bushes and foliage. A bit like that, but on a far smaller scale, is how I decided to approach this. You know, I think, you know, just to give it a slightly more detailed look than obviously the far away hills that you see in the distance. That was the plan. And tons of variations of browns and greens and stuff like that. I mean, but yeah, like, I think greens, I mean, I've talked about on this channel before how historically I definitely struggle to get greens right, and I do think that greens, they're always sort of a little bit tricky, you know. I don't think they're ever straightforward, that's for sure. You know, but I do think this worked out relatively well. Moving into, because we're just about to approach doing the water. The water I found a little bit interesting to do, because I wanted to more add the colour of the land and reflections and stuff like that, instead of just, you know, like blues. I mostly wanted to do this because I wanted it to be more earthy instead of ethereal. I wanted to have more of a say, like a sort of real vibe instead of a dreamlike ethereal feel to it. You know, so if I had added in, you know, like sort of cool blues and greens and stuff like that, I think it would have looked really nice. But I don't think it would have been effective for this sort of painting. So instead what I ended up doing was I ended up using a lot of browns, a lot of greys, but also trying to add some reflections in from the closer hills and the rocks, to bring in a little bit of those earth colours. So that was actually a relatively long process, just trying to get the water to look decent, and I sort of ended up doing what I usually do with oil painting, which was almost trying to, although it's so different with oil painting, because with oil painting you're obviously changing wet layers, and so when a layer is wet, right, you can literally just go straight in and go bath with a wet brush and blend it all into one thing. Whereas with something like this, obviously you can blend to a certain extent when acrylic is still sort of tacky, but you can't blend to the extent of oil. So I was using a sort of oil technique with the blending brush to get some of this right, but again, like with acrylic, you do need to be careful. You basically have to more use colour to blend rather than blending wet on wet like you would with oils, or could with oils, in that way. So from that perspective, a lot of what's going on here is more like a sort of utilization of the reflections, and then like putting darker colours of the landmass and then putting slightly lighter colours on top to make a sort of reflective effect. Also utilising different brush strokes. Obviously with water you always tend to go side to side instead of, you know, like land masses where you tend to paint like up, you know, up with landforms. And then I'm adding in all these sort of different variations of blues, you know, like that you would see in the sky. So there's definitely quite a lot going on with the water here actually, and I end up tweaking it for ages and ages. I think I eventually got a fairly decent effect. You know, I'm not saying that it was incredible. You know, that's probably something that I feel like I could have done better. Maybe with this one was the water, but then I don't know. You know, tell me again if you get this far into the video. Tell me what you think in the comments. Whether you think the water looks decent or not by the end. I don't know. What I will say is, another thing that I feel like I could have done maybe slightly better was there's actually a few things that I'm really proud of when it comes to the right corner, and a few things that I feel like I could have done a tiny bit better. One of those things was, the things that I was proud of was the tree, which you'll see in a little bit, and I was also quite proud of, you know, just like the sort of foliage and stuff like that, but I feel like I could have done the lilies maybe a little better, but you'll see once we get to it. But right now I'm still trying to get these reflections to work. Now, here's a sort of strange thing. So, over where the water is, sort of near the left, if you know what I mean, it was so bright that it almost felt tropical. Because tropical water is like that, you know, with the light blue. And so I started to have to go, nah, that's too blue, because it feels like a different place now. I don't want it to feel tropical. I want it to feel more dark and moody, like a Loch of Scotland type thing. So I started to try and desaturate all that blue with more of, and don't get me wrong, you do get that nice sort of blue in Scotland on a sunny day, but I still wanted to tone it down with greys and browns just to make it a bit more moody. I was actually, when I added those colours in though, I did like them, and I sort of started to go, this would almost be a good follow-up to Arcadian Island. You know, more like a sort of undiscovered, you know, like creek where, you know, nobody's really ever gone before, and it's completely natural, and there's no human remnants there. And I sort of was toying with the idea of then just rocking with the blue and pushing that forward, but I decided again that I wanted to try more have a loch effect. So started toning it down, and so that was the sort of thought process behind a lot of what was going on there. And you'll see me tone it down a lot moving forward. You'll see the blues very much gradually sort of start to disappear, but you know, I still want the blue there, and I think this is the thing about subsequent layers. Layering paint over dry paint, I think is useful, because you've obviously got layers underneath that can still give you a little hint of that colour, a little hint of that blue, but then you're also playing around with, oh look, you know, like now we've got greys and browns and all this sort of stuff over, and it adds a sort of dynamic complexity that you couldn't really get if you were trying to do this wet on wet, for example. Wet on wet, it would be a nightmare. It's as simple as that. Not that I'm saying it's not possible, of course it's possible. I love doing water wet on wet, but trying to do this particular type of water wet on wet would be difficult. The way I would usually approach, say if I was oil painting water, would be I would have a dry gesso layer, and then I would add my oil paint on, and I would blend out all the colour over a dry gesso layer. You see what I'm saying? So it's a totally different approach to painting, whereas this, the way that we're utilising this this acrylic here, is so different. You know, adding in these reflections and then, you know, painting over, you know, colour with more fresh colour and stuff like that. It's just a totally different approach. I was sort of debating whether to add in pink, but then I was like, see, to be fair, in real life you wouldn't get reflections like that. There's no way. Like, I mean, yeah, there might be some colour from the sky going into the water, but I really don't think that it would be as extreme as, like, oh, like, you know, I don't think the pink would reach the water like that, you know. So I didn't. And again, I wanted to keep it moody, you know, that moody feel. So, and that's why I'm keeping it sort of more with browns and greens and stuff, and now I'm adding in a bit more of those reflection colours again, you know, to this more brown grey water, to try and sort of get those reflections looking a bit better. I feel like the reflections eventually did look pretty alright. Reflections in water for me can be really cool. It may be a bit hit or miss. I don't know, because I mean, some people do it incredibly well. You know, some people. Sometimes though, I think when I'm painting, I like to have water more feel mysterious and sort of ethereal with the colour usage, and when I use like browns and greens and stuff like that in my water a lot of the time, and you know, bright blue, sort of aqua blue, I feel like all those sort of colours just make it look very spooky and cool and ethereal, whereas this, it's a bit different when you add reflections in it. It starts to look a lot more I don't know, like not dreamlike or ethereal, but maybe more a bit like realistic. You know, it's a totally different thing, isn't it? It's a totally different way of painting. So, yeah. I do think that reflections can look really, really cool if you use them right, though. Whether I use them right here, I don't know, but you know, again, like, you guys can be the judge of that. You know, because I you know, you can sort of see the greens and the browns and stuff like that in the water, which I think is pretty cool. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe next time I do something like this, I might approach it a bit different. I don't know. This also, like, but this is the thing, like, experimentation is so important. You know, as an artist, you should really be experimenting as much as you can. You know, trying different things, because the more you try things and find out whether they work or don't work, it's going to save you. Firstly, it's going to give you more ideas moving forward. Like, I feel like it's very inspirational. But second of all, it also is going to sort of teach you, like, you know, like, oh, well, I can do this, I can utilize this, you know. It's going to teach you what works and what doesn't work, and it's going to give you so many new ideas because of that, you know. Because it's so easy to fall into a rut in any artistic medium, you know, music, painting. We've talked about this on this channel before. It's so easy to fall into a rut, which is not what you want as an artist. What you want as an artist is to constantly be trying new things, you know, constantly be painting new scenes. And I'll tell you something, I've got a pretty crazy idea for my next painting, which I'm really excited to try. This is one that I've toyed around with years ago, when I was an oil painter, learning how to oil paint really. And I produced some pretty cool effects, but this is going to be a totally different approach to this theme, and I'm excited to give it a bash. I've really been falling in love again with, see, back when I was growing up, right, one of my favourite painters was the proto-romanticist, you could call him, Joseph Wright of Derby. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of him. He's painted some incredible works, and I'm going to be definitely taking compositional inspiration from some Joseph Wright of Derby. I think moving maybe into my next painting, and maybe even a painting after that, just to play around with more of a romantic feel instead of you know, because obviously we've done a bit of tonalism on this channel, we've done a bit of symbolism on this channel, with definitely more sort of feelings of Whistler and Bocklin and stuff like that. I have no idea what this would fall under. You know, this would maybe be more of a sort of yeah, I don't know what this would be. It's not dramatic enough to be romantic, but it's not moody enough to be tonalist, and it's not moody enough to be symbolist, and I don't know what this would be, but it's something. You know, I think as long as it evokes something, you're doing okay. But anyway, moving forward, I think my next few paintings are going to be maybe a little bit more romantic inspired, and proto-romantic inspired. You know, when I say that, I mean, you know, right before the romantic movement really came into being, the painters that paved the way for that movement to really take place. And Joseph Wright of Derby was one of those painters who really was doing very romantic motifs and playing around with those extreme contrasts of dark and light before anyone. And one of the most popular things that romantics loved to paint was Vesuvius. Now you're starting to probably guess what my next painting's going to be. An erupting volcano. Now, here's the thing, like, you know, the romantics just loved that sort of drama, didn't they? They loved that incredibly dramatic, you know, nature just taking its course and just smashing through, you know, humanity's like illusions of being able to fight against it. I think the romantics really loved playing around with those ideas, and Vesuvius was one of the most profound examples of this in history, and so many romantics played around with these eruptions. Obviously, Vesuvius erupted many times. I think people are under the illusion that Pompeii was the only eruption. That's not accurate. And in the 1700s, Vesuvius erupted quite a few times, which gave them direct inspiration because they could see it. Later on, I think maybe a lot of Americans will understand and know this because in World War II, their soldiers saw Vesuvius erupt again, and it was seen as an omen for them taking Italy. Just as Italy surrendered, I'm sure, and the US were sent to garrison the country, as Patton moved in. Obviously, we, the Brits, obviously took a lot of Italy too with Montgomery, but as the Americans moved in with Patton, the US forces saw Vesuvius erupt, and it's on camera, so go and look that up, it's pretty cool. But let's get back to this painting. Sorry, I don't mean to ramble on about my next painting before I've even done it, but I've added in these little lilies, or whatever it is. I don't want to call them lilies directly because it's more just meant to be sort of like, random flora, random sea or water, I should say, plants that just sort of float around and do their own thing. I don't know what they are. And then you've got these sort of weird long grasses and stuff like that. I was just making that up, and that's the thing. I feel like maybe I could have done better with those. Maybe added in a little bit more detail or something. I don't know, but I don't think the end result is awful either. So they're sort of sitting in the water there, and then I'm adding in these rocks. But what I really was quite happy with was the dead tree. I had this dead tree in, which is sort of on the land that's obviously washed up. The loch has sort of taken it and washed it up, because how you see that on lake banks, river banks, wherever you are with water, there tends to be dead wood. So I wanted to add, a dead tree in there. And this is me starting it now. I'm adding in, just so that you know what I'm doing here, I'm adding in my darkest dark yet of this whole painting. Straight Paynes Grey, right? In a big line, and then I'm painting with burnt umber, right? Because of its more woody red colour, and raw umber, to make sort of flecks of bark and tree. And then I'm painting a sort of whitish grey around it, because the whitish grey is going to be the bark of the tree. Because you know how some trees are almost more like they're sort of grey and white, almost bark, greyish bark. So I'm sort of wrapping that around this dark brown grey area to create the effect of a dead tree. And I was quite happy with how that turned out. That I think was a success. It definitely comes across as a dead tree, I think. But again, you guys can be the judge of that. But yeah, me and my girlfriend, very near my house, there's a place called Dunstan. Dunstan used to be a mine. Where I am, like in Scotland, it's like quite a sort of poor rural community, because our main industry all used to be mining. There's mines everywhere, but they're all shut, and That's the thing, like, you know, villages literally just fell into ruin, a complete abandonment. There's tons and tons of abandoned villages around where I live, and because there's just no employment. And this is the interesting thing. Dunstan actually had a village right beside it. Obviously, Miners' Rows, where the miners would go and mine Dunstan. There's a giant bin, which we call a hill. It's Dunstan Hill. And there's also a cool piece of water. It's not a loch because it's not natural, I don't think, but it's like this big, giant man-made lake. And me and my girlfriend were walking there maybe about 3 weeks ago, and we saw a cool bit of washed up wood, driftwood. So, you know, maybe that was like a little bit of inspiration for that dead, you know, tree there, because yeah, it literally, you know, we saw something that looked pretty much just like that like 3 weeks ago, so it was pretty cool. And I skimmed a stone and got like four hops, which was pretty good if you ask me. You know, I think I've got up to like 5 or 6 before with skimming stones. I think I'm pretty decent at skimming. You need the right stone. I mean, here's the thing. Down that way as well, there's tons of slate, so you can really get some good skims with slate because it just naturally breaks up into a frisbee. So yeah, I mean, it's a good place to go. Go to Dunstan if anyone's here listening. Go to Dunstan. And by the way, I just want other people to realise that Ayrshire's incredible. That's where I'm from. You know, don't think that you know, Ayrshire's all doom and gloom and abandoned villages and all that sort of stuff, although that's very cool to see too if you're that sort of into that sort of thing. Ayrshire's got some incredible history, and you know, you should come, and if you do come, let me know and I'll take you, you know, to a place. If you're a fan of the painting, if you're a fan of the channel, I'll let me know if you're coming to Ayrshire and I'll come and meet you, and I'll show you some of the most incredible places ever. Right, it's incredible. You know, just nature everywhere, history everywhere. This is me, by the way, utilising the brush like I was talking about earlier, by creating these sort of bristle effects by pressing it into the canvas with a dark. That's Paynes Grey I'm using. And then soon you're going to see me add in highlights, which are just greens over the top of those greys, and that creates sort of like a cool sort of foliage grass effect. So that's what I was talking about you know, earlier on the video. You know, and it's a pretty simple way to do foliage. I think some people are quite good at foliage, some people aren't. Foliage is something that I traditionally, I would say, probably have struggled with. I think foliage is probably one of the more tough things to paint. I don't particularly like doing it. It always, like, but you know, I mean, I'm starting to, you know, get decent at it, I think. Depends on the composition of the scene. I think sometimes the composition's the most important thing, because it's what makes everything look good. Do you know what I mean? Like, if your composition is right, then your foliage can look really effective. If your composition isn't right, your foliage can just look like a big mess. So you have to be very careful about that, for sure. Yeah. You have to utilise it properly, for sure. Now I'm just going in with like I think that's a square brush actually that I'm using there, and I'm just adding in all these different grasses with this square brush. You know, making it look sort of just like this little embankment, this little bit of land. And you know, that was really the finishing touch to this painting. And that was really the last major thing I did, you know, just adding in these little grasses around the water as well to make it look like the water had sort of subdued a bit of the land, and, you know, added in all these little you know, different variations of green and stuff like that. As long as you can still see my dead tree. But I put some of the grass, you know, sort of around and over the dead tree to make it look a bit more sort of like grown in. You know, same with the rocks. Added in some darker lilies slightly further away. And then that was really the end of the painting process. You know, just the finishing details of this little embankment. And here's the end result. So yeah, I think it's pretty cool. I mean, I think there's probably things that I could have done better, but hey ho, really, I guess, you know, like, there's always things that you can do better, right? So yeah, I'm relatively happy with it, although I think I am probably going to varnish it just to see how the varnishing you know, affects the water and different things like that. But yeah, I think it ended up looking okay for sure. And I'm relatively happy. I think the sky is probably my favourite part, and also the faraway hills. You know, and I think I'll probably be taking those techniques moving forward, and, you know, running with that. So thank you for watching, and I shall catch you for episode 21. Thank you and goodbye.